Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no stage and it looks like you're playing for an audience of one person.
Hold on, Moles. We can't just plop the audience right in the middle of the anguish. We gotta hold their hands and walk them into it. You are correct in deducing that there was no stage. You are incorrect in deducing that there was a crowd of one, for this is Nils, and this is probably just him coming to terms with the brutal reality of this tour. There was actually a crowd of about 20, 9 if you exclude us, and 7 if you exclude the other people that showed up to perform that were not on the bill, since this was apparently an open mic event, not a tour stop, and no one bothered to tell us. But back it up a bit, because this is day 3 and we ain't there yet. We woke up in Nils' house, our gracious host that first night, satisfied by the results of day 1. Looking back, I'd call this the calm before the storm. In the moment, it felt like, what's that word, that thing my body doesn't produce anymore? Oh yeah, optimism. It was about to get quiet for all that optimism. Our next show was in Colorado Springs, a mere 11 hours away. So, true to the tour's name, Cameron, Rocky, Grooms, Nils, and I hit the road early the next morning, but not going straight to Colorado Springs. You see, we hadn't even picked up the other half of the party yet. Daniel and the rest of the guys, a total of 6 new people, were going to be flying into Kansas City, and we had to pick them up from there. Now halt. Remember those financial implications I spoke of last chapter? Those things we were told about that convinced us to go on the tour? They all come into play now, hand in hand with the lies and embellishments that the Daniel brand is known for. Basically, we were told by AppleCare, and by AppleCare I mean Daniel Ochoa, that a few things would be happening on this tour. Number 1, we were told there would be payment during this tour. Payment from show performances. Lies. And we should have known better. Who's paying a bunch of nobodies? As you will soon see, we were lucky to get a slice of pizza after performing. Number 2, we were told that transportation to these tour stops would be covered by a van that Rocky supposedly had. There was no van. Do believe it was real spooky hours for Daniel when they got to Kansas City to find there was no van. And big spooky hours for poor Nils' knees, as he basically had to lie on the floor in the back seat of the other car for hours and hours at a time. At the peak of the tour, there were 11 people and only 2 small cars. No van. Number 3, we were told lodging would be a non-issue throughout the tour, as according to Daniel, Rocky was the plug as a hotel manager or something like that. That was a super fib. Daniel dragged his lumpy body and the rest of these poor souls halfway across the country, only for them to find out that they would be needing to spend what little money they brought along on all of this stuff, expensive stuff that they were told would be taken care of. And to top it all off, they would be making nothing in return to replenish these funds. Ultimately, they all went on tour to lose money. And with all of that now being understood as the situation we were in, do you know what it took for those guys to even join us in Kansas City? Check this out. They took an Uber to the Los Angeles Greyhound station. They took the Greyhound all the way to Las Vegas. They waited 3 hours in Vegas to then catch their red-eye Spirit Airlines flight to Kansas City. Upon getting to Kansas City, they took another Uber from the airport to Denny's, then proceeded to sit there for 4 hours since we were running late. During that time, they tried to get a hotel to stay at for a few hours and rest until we got there, but literally every hotel was booked because, get this, a bunch of people just happened to be in town for a One Direction concert. Yeah, One Direction indirectly stunted on us by showing us what a real draw and the real tour looks like. Finally, we got there to pick them up, but for some reason I can't remember, we couldn't meet them at the Denny's, so we met them in a park that they had to walk 15 miles to, with suitcases, bags, everything with them, in the humid rain, no less. So yeah, do you think they were irritated by the time they got to Kansas City? You know what? I'll let Paul speak on it.
I want a rotisserie bacon puppy.
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen.
And it just gets worse from there. As you all know, my diet is trash. A Slim Jim smoothie diet, as Styles would say. The combination of that, barely getting any sleep on Nils' floor, and driving 3 hours from Springfield to Kansas City meant that by the time we got there, I was almost dead. Imagine their shock when, after traversing all of the circles of hell to meet us, I pulled over at a gas station after about an hour and threw up my whole mind, body, and soul, telling them in between heaves that I couldn't go any further unless they wanted me to fall asleep at the wheel and kill us all. Styles was completely fed up.
I said we give up, bro. I say this show, this show, pay that $40 cancellation fee, and go have some fun, my. Hey, man.
With Paul being the only other person in the car with a license at the time, he was the only one who could drive us the remaining 5 or so hours to Colorado. And you already know how he felt at the time, so I'm sorry, Paul. Miraculously, we got to Colorado in time for the show. After settling into the motel that we weren't prepared to pay for, the tension had somewhat subsided and we were starting to get hyped up to perform. Perhaps the worst of it was behind us, we thought. Now we get to do the thing we came out here for. Friends, I wish I could tell you the nightmare was over. Shoot, for the sake of our past selves, I wish I could say the nightmare was over. But all of the day's events thus far were just the setup for the main event. We drove to the venue. Upon walking in, things immediately looked grim. It was a fairly sized bar, but there were only about 20 occupants, none of which looked like they were there for a show or even knew there was going to be a show, let alone a rap show. I'm sure they didn't expect their Colorado Springs evening out to be interrupted by a bunch of no-name rappers on a makeshift stage, but that's life. Still, we figured, what else could possibly go wrong? Cue the music. It's never over. The jig is never up. The jigs just multiply. We were already in the grip of the cursed tour. It was too late to turn back. We were about to be fully consumed. From the second the first act hit the stage, an uncanny feeling of dread gripped my chest. I just knew things were gonna go south. As the local rappers went through their songs, we noticed that the speakers were beginning to sound wonky. We nervously laughed, telling ourselves that they just had horribly mixed beats or that the owners of the bar just didn't know what they were doing with the sound for a rap show and we would just have to tweak the system so it would sound proper when it was our turn. I kid you not, by the time all of those guys were done, the speakers had crapped out. The bass was gone, just high end, screaming like a banshee. No one knew why. We tried everything before we started. Turned knobs, checked connections, cables, nothing worked. I went first, assuming it would only get worse, and by the end of the night, the speakers wouldn't be emitting any sound. I was correct. By the time the guys went, just look at this.
Hold up. Alright, let's go.
Melvin over here dying on the stage.
Let's go. Run that boy. Why that didn't start?
Oh, cuss! This is legendary.
Big session.
Oh my God.
Yo, it's your boy. It's your boy.
Whose sound is it? We might as well start roasting. Whose sound?
Yo.
Hey, look, let's just start roasting the audience.
You know what? I'm gonna just do what I can tell them. I'm gonna do what I can tell them. Forget it.
There we were. After the guys' odyssey to even get to us, after discovering that we weren't on tour but a glorified vacation to the middle of the country, we didn't even get to properly do the thing we were all there to do. Paul had already accepted his fate, choosing the F it, we'll do it live approach. Soon, that wouldn't even be an option as the microphones gave out. I'm not ashamed to admit, tears were shed that evening of July 29th, 2015. I believe Cameron, quoting one of my lyrics at the time, screamed out, "This is how depression starts!" into the night air. Personally, all I wanted to do was curl up and die, but we had to drive a while back to the hotel. And as a group, we just wanted to drown our sorrows in food, but there was pretty much nothing open after the show. I think everyone would agree, we felt defeat unlike any defeat we'd ever felt. I call it a sound defeat, but there was no sound that night. Except for, Daniel! Trying to get us to see the bright side of the BS tour he was responsible for. After everyone took turns verbally assaulting him, he pretty much gave up and joined us in crying too. Alas, the Can't Sleep tour would continue.